Good morning, everyone. It's Dan Milner from ASCP. Thank you so much for joining us for our Africa Calls Cytology session for the month of November 2022. Just as a housekeeping reminder, if you have a question during or after the presentation, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. You can type your question there and we will answer all of them live. And if we don't get to them, we will have them answered post session and put those in an email. If you're having a technical problem, you can put that in the chat and we will try to assist you, but typically you should be able to hear and see everything. The only challenge may be bandwidth. If you are having a lot of bandwidth problems and it's difficult, don't worry, we are recording this and you'd be able to access it afterwards if you miss anything. We're very excited today to have Dr. Mohideen Ghofrani, who is from my part of the country on the West Coast, and I'm going to let Dr. Leslie Lomo introduce him. Go ahead, Dr. Lomo.
Hello, welcome and greetings, participants, and welcome to this latest edition of the Africa Calls lecture series. This is Leslie Lomo again from Salt Lake City in Utah, going to be moderating this session and introducing our speaker, who I'm really thrilled to introduce. This is Dr. Mohideen Ghofrani. He is the System Medical Director for Laboratory Services and Director of Cytopathology and Women's Health at Peace Health Southwest Medical Center in Vancouver, Washington. His distinguished academic credentials include completion of his medical degree in Tehran, combined anatomic and clinical pathology residency and cytopathology fellowship training at Yale University in New Haven, Connecticut, and a Master of Business Administration with a focus on healthcare from George Washington University. Dr. Ghofrani is a trustee of the American Board of Pathology and has served in multiple leadership roles, including president of the Washington State Society of Pathologists, the president of Oregon Pathologists Association, the chair of the American Society of Cytopathology Budget and Finance Committee, and vice chair of the College of American Pathologists Cytopathology Committee. In 2021, as chair of the Peace Health Laboratory Stewardship Committee, he was recognized as an ASCP Choosing Wisely champion for reducing unnecessary testing and waste in healthcare. Dr. Ghofrani has subspecialty training and expertise in breast and gynecologic pathology, as well as special interest in board certification in clinical informatics. He has developed medical and pathology-related software, including 3 smartphone apps for the iPhone. And therefore, we are so thrilled to have him speak to us today on smartphone applications in cytopathology. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Ghofrani.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lomo, for that kind introduction. So it's a pleasure to be with you today to speak about smartphone applications in cytopathology. At the end of this presentation, I'm hoping that we're going to be able to achieve these learning objectives that you can see here. First is to be able to list some of the inherent smartphone hardware and software capabilities that can be used in cytopathology. And then also we're going to talk about the cytopathology specific smartphone applications or apps. And finally, consider the potential regulatory considerations that might be at stake when we're talking about these medical and cytopathology related apps. So with that, I'd like to go to the next slide here. So you may have seen this image on social media. This is from a newspaper article about 60 years ago. And at that time, it was very futuristic to think that we may be able to carry our phones in our pockets. And at that time, it was said that this is something that's going to be far in the future. Fast forward to today, where scenes like this are not uncommon. You can see everybody is looking at their phone, and the phones these days are not just phones that are mobile phones that you can carry in your pocket, but they have with them all the functions that you can see here that we used to have separate electronic devices for taking photographs and videos and listening to music and watching movies, navigation, and basically the functions of a desktop computer have all been summarized in this small handheld device, which is the modern smartphone. And for that reason, they've become ubiquitous. They're everywhere, smartphones. Now, there are a variety of smartphones available out there on the market, and there are several deciding factors which influence your decision as to which smartphone you want to purchase and have. I guess one of the most important considerations is obviously cost, brand recognition of the manufacturer of the device, and word of mouth, what you hear from your friends and colleagues as to what their experience has been with a certain phone. Then there are the hardware features that are implemented in the phone, the operating system, the user interface, how easy it is and how convenient it is to use, the included apps that come with the phone, or the apps that are available to install on the phone. That could be a deciding factor. The network technology, the security features, if that's an important issue to you, how secure is the phone and how secure is your information on the phone. And then there are some features that just take the decision out of your hand. For example, is that carrier, the wireless carrier, do they have coverage in the area that you are living or working in? And what's their level of support? And finally, another thing that might take this decision out of your hand is what is the organizational policy, especially if you're purchasing a phone mostly for your work environment. Are there any allowable systems that are permitted by your organization, or are there any special agreements so that it would provide a discount, for example, or some additional features that would be available to you as the employee of that organization? Now, I mentioned about the smartphone operating systems. Currently, there are two major operating systems available for smartphones. One is iOS, that is developed by Apple. And it has been said that iOS, the benefit of it is that it has a more uniform, accessible experience. It's easier to learn to work with it. It has been said that it's more secure and private environment. So if security is an important feature to you, that might be something you might be interested in. Apple as a corporation has much tighter oversight of the App Store. And so for that reason, the quality of the apps that are provided on the Apple App Store might be more controlled. And then there's the continuity of experience, because Apple doesn't just produce smartphones, they also produce laptops and tablets and even watches. And so the software applications on all these devices can be in continuation of each other. So you can start working on a document on your laptop and continue on your phone to edit that document. And many companies have produced a wider variety of accessories for Apple devices. On the other hand, we have Android operating system for smartphones. Android is technically open source, but it is sponsored by Google. And because it is open source, there is a wider choice of devices at a wider price range. So there's that selection, the wider selection that you have with Android devices. Also, in terms of the software options, there's more customization options. And finally, you get access to Google's suite of services and built-in apps when you purchase an Android device. Now, where did the word app come from? App is short for software application. And it's basically, it originated as a computer program that is designed to work on a mobile device. And then in 2009, it was suggested that smartphones be called actually app phones to distinguish them from the earlier, less sophisticated mobile phones that didn't have the capability of all these different applications to be on them. Now, more recently, things have gotten a little confusing because the term app is also being used for desktop application software as well. So programs that you use on a regular desktop computer are also being called apps. So, but for the purposes of this talk, wherever I talk about app, I mean mobile apps. Now, there are different types of apps that can be used on a smartphone. There are basically two important types, but before I get into that distinction, I'd like to mention what I said about apps on a desktop computer being called apps. For example, this is the website for cancer cytopathology as viewed on a desktop computer. So on a regular computer, you open up your browser, you go to that website, and you can get, for example, a listing of the table of contents of cancer cytopathology. Now, if you open this same browser on your smartphone, you can get access to that same content. It's just that the format of that browser on your smartphone is going to be optimized for the smaller screen of the phone. So you get same access to that content, but in a different format. And the important thing to mention is that this is not an app for cancer cytopathology. You're basically using a web browser app to go to this website, as opposed to if cancer cytopathology, for example, developed its own native app, a smartphone native app that is basically formatted for the specific purpose of going to this site, then that would be considered a native app. And in a few minutes, we're going to be seeing some examples of cytopathology specific developed native apps. But before we go to that, let's talk about some apps, smartphone apps that are not necessarily developed for cytopathology or for pathology, but they are generic smartphone apps. And one of the most common of those on smartphones, the uses of it on smartphones these days is for social media. Now, there's a wide variety of social media platforms. I'm just going to touch upon a few examples of those. But obviously, there's more to this, and there are some leaders in our field are really savvy about using social media. And I could refer you to the articles that they have published in this regard. But just to briefly touch upon this, Facebook is one of the oldest of the social media that exists, and it has developed these days into more of a social media platform for sharing pictures and comments and things like that, mostly between friends and family, but that doesn't prevent you from following American Society of Cytopathology or the ASCP on their Facebook page. Another one is Twitter. Twitter is mostly focused on short texts, 280 characters, and Twitter has become known as the hotspot for trending items since information travels very rapidly on Twitter. So if you want to have an active Twitter account, there's going to be a lot of maintaining involved in it because you need to be in the loop and keep on top of things. So this is an example of the ASCP Twitter page. Instagram is a platform for sharing images mostly. It is more popular in the younger age group, but ASC, ASCP, and other professional societies do have Instagram pages that you can follow. And finally, LinkedIn is another social media platform, but it is different from others that it has a more professional look and feel to it. It's more like a job search website or recruiting platform. And once again, our professional societies mostly have a LinkedIn address where you can connect to them and network with followers in that same field. Another generic type of app that can be used for the purposes of cytopathology and pathology is subscribing to podcasts. So these are similar to old radio shows that we used to have. They can be either devoted to specialty topics in our field, or they could be interviews with leaders in our field. So it's a nice combination of both fun and information. And there's a wide variety of them. You can search for cytopathology or pathology and see what interests you and subscribe to those and listen to those episodes regularly. Then there's YouTube. This is another generic app that is available on smartphones. And fortunately, our professional societies like ASC and ASCP have their own YouTube channels as well, with a lot of nice informative videos, educational videos. These might be a few minutes up to an hour and a half long. So you can fit them in your day, listen to or watch videos on your downtime and learn something in the process. So here are some recent videos that have been posted on the ASC YouTube channel. You can see there's a wide variety of topics talking about telecytology validation, reviewing digital pap tests, molecular yield and cytomorphologic assessment of FNA specimen, supernatants, investigation of fluid cytology findings related to sample volume, and also anatomic pathology capacity building in a referral hospital in southern Rwanda. So you can see there's a wide variety of topics. And by the same token, ASCP has its own YouTube channel. And once again, you can see on the right a list of some of the recent videos that have been posted on that channel. A lot of good information about molecular biomarker revolution in non-small cell lung cancer, trends in HER2 testing, African pathology laboratory networks, best practices in non-small cell lung cancer, biomarker testing, workforce initiatives by the ASCP, cell block preparation technique, basics of clinical flow cytometry. So you can see there's a wealth of information, a wealth of educational material that you can take advantage of for free on the YouTube channels of our professional societies. Now that we've talked a little bit about our generic apps that we can be using for the purposes of education and networking and cytopathology, let's turn to the hardware features of smartphones. So taking photographs, I think, is one of the most popular applications, hardware applications for smartphones these days. Basically, once we have this phone in our pocket, we have a camera with us as we're walking around throughout the day. So that's really convenient. And you can use this same camera photographic capability for taking pictures of microscopic fields. And you can basically hold your phone up to the ocular lens of your microscope to take pictures, but it takes a lot of skill. It takes a steady hand. And it's not really practical for extended periods of time. So it's helpful to just hold up the phone to the microscope, take an image, and then after you edit that image and adjust the lighting, you can have a decent picture that you can share on the fly, whether you want to share it to social media, if you want to share it with a colleague, if you want to seek a consultation on that just one image, that works for that purpose. So just holding the phone up to the microscope. But as I said, it's not really practical for extended periods of time, and certainly not practical for taking videos. For that reason, it's really useful to have a microscope phone adapter. So basically what these adapters do is they provide a firm support, a stable support for placing the phone on the microscope in front of the microscope ocular lens so that you can take a picture. Now, some of these, like for example, the microscope adapter that you see here in the image, they can be adjusted so that you can basically place any type of phone, any type of smartphone in there, and it's just a matter of adjusting those brackets and the orientation of the tray so that the lens of the smartphone is right in front of the ocular of the microscope. And as you can see here, this is an example. I took this image on the right with the smartphone that I had available to me at that time by adjusting those brackets and that tray. On the other hand, there are some microscope adapters that have been developed for specific smartphones. So this is another example of that, where you can see that this case has been specifically built for a certain iPhone. And so if you have that iPhone, and if you have that type of smartphone and that's what you're going to be using for an extended period of time, then maybe this could be a consideration, is to purchase one of these types of adapters that are specific. The benefit of that is that it's a easier fit, it's a steady fit, and you don't have to adjust those the adapter to make it the phone fit. But on the other hand, you're basically committed. So if you change the phone that you're going to be using for these purposes, then you're going to have to get another adapter. But either way, you can get really good, decent pictures off of the microscope with these adapters. There are other adapters that don't fit only on one ocular, but basically get stabilized on both oculars. So you want to be using these, especially if you have a multi-headed scope, where you could place this adapter for an extended period of time. And these can be, once again, adjustable so that you can use any type of smartphone to place them in front of the microscope. Now, when I was first time creating this presentation several years ago, there was only a handful of manufacturers that made such smartphone adapters. But now if you go and search online, you can see a wide variety of these smartphone adapters, and most of them are a very reasonable price. So it's a very inexpensive option to be able to basically do photomicrography on your microscope with your smartphone. So my suggestion would be to basically, if you are interested in getting one of these smartphone microscope adapters, just search online and look at the reviews and see which of these works best for your particular situation. Now, the uses of photomicrography, I think I could summarize them in three main categories. One is education, the other is documentation, and finally consultation. So let's look a little bit in more detail into these applications. So as I mentioned, being able to stabilize the smartphone on the microscope gives you the ability to not only take pictures more easily, but also you can take videos. And you can imagine the educational benefit of having such videos in your practice. So for example, you can create a video where you go around the slide. You can see different fields of view at different magnifications, especially for cytology. You can focus up and down on the slide so that you can have everything on focus at the same time. And then if you just add a narration, or it would become essentially like a virtual sign out where you can provide it to anyone who is interested in learning about a topic inside of pathology and pathology, and basically narrating what you are seeing under the microscope and providing that educational experience. It's like a virtual sign out, basically. The other use of photomicrography in cytopathology and pathology could be for documentation purposes. So if you have the capability to import images into your pathology information system, you can add additional information to your pathology reports by including images of pertinent fields of view, pertinent stains that you've provided. And the benefits of this are many. For example, your report, if it goes to different institutions, they will probably not have access to the glass slides or the digital slides. But by having these images in the report, you can basically substantiate and document how you came to a particular diagnosis. It also might be helpful for patients to see what you saw under the microscope for their case. So, and finally, if for whatever reason, like for example, molecular testing, the slide needs to be used for that molecular testing and you're going to lose access to that slide, having that documentation in the report or elsewhere is really helpful in terms of preserving that information, that visual information in perpetuity. And finally, another use of photomicrography could be consultations. Now, you can easily use these photographic images that you're taking of the microscopic fields to share them with consultants far and wide and get opinions regardless of where they are located. So this brings up the topic of telepathology or telecytopathology. The American Telemedicine Association defines telepathology as a form of communication between medical professionals that includes the transmission of pathology images and associated clinical information for the purposes of various clinical applications, including primary diagnosis, rapid cytology interpretation, intra-op and second opinion consultations, ancillary study review, archiving, and quality activities. So you can see that there's a lot that can be achieved through telemedicine. And as you can see on the image on the right, you can, as long as you have a stable connection, you can have this as a live telecommunication, or this could be a static image transmission that is asynchronous. So let's go into more detail about this. This is adapted from a table in a paper that was published a few years ago in the Journal of American Society of Cytopathology, where it talked about different telecytology modalities. And for the purposes of this talk, I'm going to be talking about the first two types, which is more applicable to smartphones. The third and the fourth type are more applicable to larger systems and desktop computers. So one of them is static image transmission. This is basically taking a few images and sharing that with your consultant or whoever you are sending these images to. The advantages of static image transmission is that it's very simple. As you could see, you could basically hold a camera or hold your phone in front of the telescope, in front of the microscope and take a few pictures. It's low cost and it has the benefit of being asynchronous. So in other words, if you are sending an image from one part of the world and sending it across the world, you don't have to worry about time differences because they can review the image whenever they receive it. And it doesn't have to be at the same time. The sender and the receiver don't have to be at the microscope at the same time or at the computer. The disadvantages is that it's time consuming. It's because you have to, if you want to make an adequate assessment, you have to take images from different fields of the microscopic slide. And you can't view the entire slide in just one image. And for cytology especially, you can't have all the cells in focus. If it's like a three-dimensional sample, you'll have to focus up and down and take several images to make sure that everything is in focus at the same time. The second modality is live image transmission. So it's basically video microscopy. In other words, there's a live video feed between the sender and the receiver, and whatever the sender transmits is viewed in real time by the receiver. It's a simple way to do it, especially if you have a adapter to put the phone on the microscope. Basically, you just position the phone there, and then you can review the slide and navigate the slide as you would under the microscope. And by this method, you can review the entire slide because you can navigate to any area of the slide that you wish. The disadvantage is that it has to be synchronous. So in other words, the sender and the receiver have to be sitting at the computer or at their device at the same time, regardless of what their time zones are. And if you are going to be transmitting these images live through video conferencing software, obviously the two softwares have to be compatible on the sending end and the receiving end. Now, we've talked about apps that are made generically for smartphones, and we've been using them for pathology purposes or cytopathology purposes. Now I'm going to talk about apps that have specifically been developed for medical purposes. So medical smartphone apps have been defined as medical apps that help people manage their own health and wellness, promote healthy living, and gain access to useful information when needed. The users of these medical smartphone apps can include healthcare professionals, consumers, patients, and according to industry estimates that were published last year, there are about 350,000 healthcare apps available for smartphones. And this equates to billions of mobile health application downloads each year by smartphone users worldwide. The United States Food and Drug Administration, based on this wide sort of popularity of medical smartphone apps, has made comments about this and has recognized that some of these medical apps can be considered medical devices. And as such, they could potentially be under the jurisdiction and under the supervision of the FDA. Now, in wherever you are practicing right now, this might not be as much of a consideration, and you're going to have to refer to your local authorities to see what mobile health apps are regulated and which ones are not. But the FDA classification, I think, can give some guidance to us to just consider what the issues are with smartphone apps, especially as they pertain to cytopathology. So the first category that the FDA has commented on for apps are those that are not considered medical devices. So these are, for example, generic aids or general purpose products that, for example, might be image display for multidisciplinary patient management meetings like grand rounds or tumor boards or patient consultation. So this is those imaging apps that I was talking about. So when we're sending something for consultation, or we're taking images for teaching or for patient grand rounds, for patient tumor boards, the FDA has said that these are not considered medical devices and they are not subject to regulation by the FDA. Also, apps that have general patient education that facilitate patient access to reference information, or apps that have been developed to provide access to electronic ebooks or audiobooks of medical texts and other reference materials, or educational tools that are used for medical training or to reinforce training that was previously received. So all you can see here that educational purposes basically are not subject to regulation by the FDA. An example of such an app in cytopathology is what is depicted on the right-hand side of this slide. This is a screenshot from the app called CytoAtlas. And this is basically like a mini textbook, a mini atlas that has been developed for cytopathology. And it has different chapters. So for example, if you go to the salivary gland chapter, there are different entities that are described there. And here's an image from pleomorphic adenoma. You can see this is one of multiple images that are included in this app. And you can see that it has a caption which explains what the cytologic finding is. And so this is a really useful tool for educational purposes for trainees who are starting out in the field of cytopathology. This is a good, handy reference to have in your pocket and just review. And then there are a second category of apps that are considered by the FDA to be medical devices, but they are under enforcement discretion. In other words, the FDA is not going to be strictly regulating these apps. And so these are apps that they have software functions that meet the regulatory definition of a device, but they pose minimal risk to patients and to consumers. So for example, these are apps that could help patients manage their disease or condition without providing specific treatment suggestions. So that's the important point. Like for example, a diabetic patient who wants to track their A1C or their daily blood sugars, they can use an app to trend those, but it's not giving specific treatment recommendations. And then the other is an app that automates tasks for healthcare providers. So an example of that would be a software that uses patient characteristics such as age, sex, behavioral risk factors to provide patient-specific screening or counseling or preventive recommendations from well-known and established authorities. So for an example of that, I could mention the ASCCP app, the American Society of Colposcopy and Cervical Pathology app, which sort of simplifies the screening recommendations and especially the management recommendations for abnormal screening results of cervical cancer. So for example, you enter the information that is specific to the patient in terms of, did the patient have a history of colposcopy? What did their colposcopy show? Did they have any prior cytology? What did it show? And then based on the aggregate findings, it will provide you with a recommendation as how that patient should be managed. And it simplifies basically to having to memorize all those different algorithms in the ASCCP guidelines. So this is sort of like a clinical decision support app. And it is something that the FDA has said that even though this does meet the definition of medical device, but it is not going to be enforced. And the FDA is currently exercising discretion in enforcement. And finally, we have the apps that are regulated by the FDA. These are apps that are considered medical devices, and they do they do create sufficient risk that the FDA feels that these need to be regulated. And so an example would be a medical app that uses a mobile device's built-in features, such as the camera, to perform medical functions. So something that's used by a licensed practitioner to diagnose or treat a disease. So an example of this would be to analyze an image of a skin lesion using mathematical algorithms and provide the user with an assessment of the risk of the lesion. So this is the example that was stated in the FDA guidelines, but you can apply this to by the same token to cytopathology and to pathology, because as you know, there are many algorithms, artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms that are being developed that basically get the morphologic features from a pathology slide and then run this through an algorithm to determine what the probable diagnosis would be. The problem with these machine learning algorithms is that right now they are still in their infancy, and there is the potential for unrecognized biases that may lead to some issues in certain categories of patients that have not been adequately represented in the training set. So for this reason, I think we should also follow the recommendation of the FDA. And if we see any sort of apps that do seem to be based on machine learning and algorithms of these types, we want to make sure that they're adequately validated before we totally trust them, because we want to make sure that there aren't any inherent and hidden biases that we're not aware of. So with that summary, I think I'd like to bring our presentation to a close, and I'll be happy to answer any questions after this. But in conclusion, smartphones these days, there are many generic smartphone apps that we can use in a variety of ways in cytopathology in terms of education, professional networking, and then also the hardware accessories and accessories that are associated with our smartphones these days, especially the camera. They provide a low-cost opportunity for photomicrography, teleconsultation, education. And finally, there are a few cytopathology apps out there available that most of them don't pose any significant risk to consumers, but there are others that should be used with caution. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your time. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to address them as much as I can.
Thank you, Dr. Grafrani, for that amazing, really comprehensive overview. And so we actually do have a question. For the purpose of cytopathology consultation, which smartphone would you recommend that would produce better quality images?
So thank you for that question. I mean, I think these days, the cameras that are available on our modern smartphones have gotten to a level of quality that I think, I don't think there is really any distinct brand that I would recommend over the others. And honestly, each person might have their own personal preference as to which camera is easier to use and which provides better quality images. I mean, there has been always this debate about whether the Samsung camera is better or an iPhone camera is better. I'm not going to get into that argument, but basically, I think all smartphone cameras these days have sufficient quality that you can transmit the information that you want in a cytopathology slide adequately by using these cameras.
And Dr. Gofrani, there was another question from Alex and Remy in Tanzania. And Alex is one of our anatomic pathologists that does cancer consultations using whole slide images, but obviously is interested in smartphones. His other question, which I posted a link, but I would like to get your input back as well, is which adapter, these adapters for smartphones that you can order on Amazon, which one you recommend? I answered in the text the one I recommend, which was in the picture that you showed. If you want to scroll back to that slide, it's $25.99 from the US dollars. And what I have done personally in the past is that, yeah, go forward. Can you go forward too?
Oh, go forward.
Yeah.
This one?
No, keep going to the Amazon page.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So that first one on the Amazon page is the one that I have personally used. I've bought a lot of those and sent those to people in Africa. I am happy to continue doing that, but I would like to know what one you would recommend. And I think you can show them that one. So just for everybody's edification, the first one at the top there in this image has an adjustable bit on your phone. It doesn't matter what smartphone you use, but you do have to be able to remove your ocular from your microscope. And that's not always the case. So that one is limited by, can you remove your ocular objective from your microscope or not? Some of them are permanently put in there and some of them can be removed. Some of them you have to screw out and it takes a little bit of time to do that. Anyway, what, Dr. Gofrani, would you recommend? And I think you can go back to your image if you want to show that.
Sure, yeah. So, I mean, I think instead of recommending a certain brand or a certain, I think the important thing is what are the features on it. So what you mentioned, Dr. Milner, about this one, the fact that you have a good experience with it, I think that goes a long way in terms of recommending it. One that I used is this one. It's called Snap Zoom. And the reason I like this one is, first of all, it's an adjustable one that you can use different types of smartphones. So it's not tying you into a specific brand of smartphone to use it. And then the other thing is that it doesn't only attach to one ocular lens, it attaches to both. But as I mentioned, every time you want to set it up, you're going to have to, it would be best used if it was a double-headed scope. So this is the one that I prefer in my own practice, but as I said, everyone's practice is going to be different. So what you mentioned, Dr. Milner, about the one there where it attaches to one of the oculars, that looks like a very convenient one, and one that's very portable that can be used in a wide variety of scenarios.
It is, and the one thing I will comment for the group is that it is all plastic. So it's 3D printed, I think, by this company, so it's very inexpensive. I would imagine if you happen to be in a place, maybe our South African colleagues, where 3D printers are available, you may be able to find a design for one of these online and actually 3D print it yourself. But these are rather inexpensive, and if you are interested, please let me know. I've purchased many of these and shipped them to people, and people use them quite frequently. But you do have to be able to remove that ocular. So the first thing you want to do is go to the microscope you're planning on using and make sure your oculars that you normally look through, one of those will slide out, and then you're good to go. And this is great. Leslie, there's a couple of other questions.
Yes, so the second one is, how does your institution deal with the blurring of professional and personal identities on social media? Does your institution have social media guidelines for employees?
So that's a very good question, and it is a very it's a hot topic these days, especially because social media does frequently pull us into political debates and controversial topics. So some users have been able to separate those two, the professional and the personal identity, on social media. Maybe one way to address it would be to have alternative profiles on social media. So for example, for medical Twitter or pathology Twitter, where you want to participate in the educational aspects and the case sharing aspects that are available on Twitter, you could have a professional profile. And then for other conversations, for example, into political debates, if you're into that, you could have a separate profile. In terms of organizational and institutional policies, I think almost all organizations have very strict policies about this. Obviously, you should not be posting patient identifying information. And even if you think that it might not identify a specific patient, I would just suggest caution on posting any kind of patient materials, especially providing any information that could link back to a patient. Being careful about that. And then also, in terms of, once again, I'm sure that employers will have some strict guidelines in terms of using their name, their logo, or representing your institution on social media. You want to be really careful about that. People could get into trouble for that. So yeah, that's my caution, is to ideally maintain separate profiles for the professional and the personal aspect of that.
Yes, and in follow-up, I would have to agree with Dr. Grafrani. I think that, just as part of condition of employment and things like that, there are very strict guidelines, certainly at my institution as well, governing activity and the use of social media. And that is the same for residency training and fellowship training programs as well. So I'm just scanning oh, here we have another question. I've seen some research on using AI in image diagnosis, for example, as X-ray for TB diagnosis, but not much on slide images for pathology. What is your view on using AI for diagnosis for histopathology or cytopathology? Do you think that in the future we might have AI diagnosed cases, especially for countries with limited numbers of pathologists? Dr. Milner, I would like to hear your views as well. This is from Bridget from Zambia.
So thank you very much for that question. Also, and I'd also like to hear the opinions of the other panelists as well. But I agree. I think that in the future, AI is going to be something that we are going to be seeing a lot more of. Right now, I think in terms of the practical uses of AI and machine learning and pathology, we are limited to specific purposes. So it's very specific. For example, what you mentioned in your example for TB diagnosis. So maybe there are algorithms for reading the fight stain or reading an AFB stain. And so which are really time consuming and take a lot of time for a pathologist. For an AI algorithm, it might be a simple matter of giving these tedious tasks to the machine learning algorithm and have that search for positive staining organisms. So I think there's a lot of potential, but I don't think we are in practice there right now. And I don't think AI is going to replace pathologists, but it is going to enhance and increase the efficiency and productivity of pathologists. So in countries with limited numbers of pathologists, I think it is going to be very helpful in terms of making the best use of the limited numbers of pathologists that we have available.
Thanks, Dr. Gofrani. And I'm 100% in agreement with you. I think that artificial intelligence for our African colleagues in the pathology laboratory would be a huge boon to their productivity level, to their quality, to their confidence, to their ability to reduce their turnaround time. I mean, there's no question that it would be very beneficial. And just as some side points, we've applied for grants actually with Alex. We've applied for some grants with industry partners to do AI work with their not yet FDA approved platforms to just get more data on African patients and also at the same time benefit our colleagues. Those grants weren't necessarily funded, but those AI companies are very interested, and I continue to have conversations with them around doing projects specifically around tumor diagnosis of solid tumors in Africa. And we'll keep this group informed as those opportunities come up. On the cytology side, for those of you who are not aware, and this is not a product promotion, it's just an informational piece of information for you to think about, Hologic, who is one of the leaders in cytology, because they are huge proponents of co-testing for HPV and cytology, they have developed a system that not only uses AI, but uses a very special digital scanning system that's different from the scanners that ASCP provides, for example, that allows them to scan a thin prep, not a traditional smear, but a thin prep, cytology prep, apply their AI to it, and the cytotechnician or pathologist can sit down at the screen and sign out a pap smear in about 4 seconds. And that may sound weird to you, but I was actually sitting at the screen, not a cytopathologist, not a cytologist, not, only trained during my residency 20 years ago with Dr. Lomo, and they would show the images up and I would go, oh, this is HSIL in like 1 second or 2 seconds. So that technology, I believe, has the ability to really leapfrog Africa forward to saying, you know, sure, WHO is saying HPV only, but is that really going to catch every single of the 80 diagnoses we can have in the cervix of a woman? Is that going to capture all of them? It's not. The pap smear is there for a lot of other reasons. And so we are trying to pilot 2 projects right now with them, one potentially in Botswana and one potentially in Ethiopia, with that system. The interesting thing that you'll all be happy to hear is they don't sell that device. It's too expensive. So they're only looking at it from a subscription model, which means that for Africa, they can make it very, very inexpensive to free for these types of projects. So really excited about that, trying to move that forward. We'll see how that goes, but it does require, as you're all in your head saying, wait a minute, it does require the infrastructure to be able to do thin prep, which is not cheap. So it's not necessarily for prime time yet, as Dr. Gofrani said, but I do think that there is a potential there for even for cytology to have pap smears at a very high volume with really good turnaround time. So we'll see where that goes. As far as I know, again, from an industry, not an industry sponsorship point of view, there's not another company working on that, because many people think the HPV only recommendation from WHO has killed the cytology market, but WHO is slowly but surely realizing that these other 80-something diagnoses that are in the cervix, including tuberculosis, by the way, that Bridget mentioned, are not something you can diagnose with an HPV test. And so how are we going to treat those women down the road is very important. So very good topic, very important. How we will get AI into your hands for you to be able to use it. I know some of our South African colleagues probably already have some AI that they're working with, especially at the universities. But if you have more interest or questions in this, please do reach out and we will keep this group informed of where that's going.
And
Yes.
I just wanted to check. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead,
Please go ahead, Dr.
Ali.
Loma.
Please.
I just wanted to chime in on the AI use as really an adjunct and support for pathologists. And the technology that Dr. Milner was discussing is one that I have personally worked with, and I think Dr. Loma may have also the predecessor of that, which truly it is infrastructure rich and requiring some different components to it, but really what it does is it fully scans the slide for you and picks out just selected images that then need to be reviewed as kind of like a pre-screen essentially for the areas of interest that we would then use our technical expertise to really evaluate. And if there's anything of concern in those images, that's when we can kind of go on to the next step for pathology diagnosis or cytopathology diagnosis. And I think even though this has been developed for pap stains in pap smear settings, there really is the possibility for different technologies to look at all different sort of specimen types and perform screening in a very similar way that could greatly reduce our time, but still allow us to focus on the diagnostic component. So I do see this as a future. It may be a 60-year future, it may be a 20-year future, just like Dr. Gofrani had showed us the article for, but I do see this as something that will only help us and not replace us.
Yeah, and let me just comment and say that you know, the Hologic system I described, because they have a whole series of projects, which starts with the ones that Ali's describing, which are in use today. Everyone's using them, to this new system that is not yet available in the US. It's only available in Europe, which is why we're trying to get it, you know, available in Africa through this project. That new system essentially looks at every single cell on the slide, statistically determines what that cell is, and then presents those images to you as the user statistically in 25 summary images. So if you look at those 25 images and you see 20 images that look like H cells, that's telling you that, you know, 80% of the slide is H cell. If you look at it and you only see 2 H cell cells, it may mean that there's only 1 or 2 cells, but the take home is that the computer is classifying every single cell and then presenting them to you as the user statistically, which allows you to very quickly make a decision about what it is. But it is not saying this is H cell. It's just saying statistically, this is what is on this slide. What do you think it is? Just like Ali just said. So it's a very cool, quick, rapid system that I'm hoping we can get it to you guys and get it some projects going.
Yes, and I know we're probably close to end of time, but yes, I just wanted to say that I completely agree with all of the comments about AI. It's tremendous utility in handling tedious tasks, as mentioned, but I really appreciate Dr. Ghofrani's caution that these systems really need to be carefully validated, and we have to really address the possibility of bias, particularly. And so, Dan, do you think that we need to wrap up now?
Yes, thank you everyone so much. As always, we will post the recording back to this group. I do apologize. I noted about 10 minutes into this session that my initial introductory or registration email, somehow the addresses got truncated. And so I sent it out again. And I know some of you joined later, but I will send out the recording for everyone. And I do think the first part of Dr. Ghofrani's talk was very, very helpful in bringing everybody up to date. And so I do encourage you to listen to the whole thing if you weren't able to hear that first part. Also, there is a survey that I put in the chat. I'm going to put that in the email when I send you the recording, and that is an unrelated to our sessions survey about training and education in Africa that we are updating. We've done this survey before, but we're redoing that survey now. So we'd really appreciate if you could fill that out at your convenience. And then Leslie, when is our next session? Do you know? I can look it up if you don't know.
That will be in January, I believe. So 2 months time.
Yeah, I don't think we have one in December.
That is correct. But we
But
do
have our first Cytology Echo in December on
Yes.
December 21st. Yes.
That's what I was checking. Okay, so December 21st, which will be our last meeting of the year, will be our first Cytology Echo. For those of you who have participated in the Pathology Echoes, where we have a short didactic and then 2 case presentations, we will be following a similar format, but it will be a cytology topic, and we hope you will all join us. So.
Thanks again to Dr. Ghofrani, and thanks to all the participants for joining. And we will see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.